We're joined today by former ANC Provincial Secretary in KwaZulu-Natal, Mdumiseni Ntuli, who is a contender for the ANC Secretary General at the ANC's 55th National Conference taking place in December. Thank you very much for your time, Mr. Ntuli. You have been crisscrossing the country. Your name has come up as a candidate to contest the ANC Secretary General position. How has branches received you, and what is the message that you are telling branches?
Well, thanks a lot. I've had an opportunity to interact with a number of our structures throughout the country, and I must say that I've been very humbled by firstly the reception in the interactions that I've had with many comrades, but equally the expression of confidence that emerges when you look at the nominations that are taking place throughout the country. And of course, the central message that I've been carrying around is that we are at the crossroad as a movement. The choice we make now will determine the future of the African National Congress. And unfortunately, given the fact that the ANC has a very serious impact to the South African society, that equally will have implications to what happens in our country. And so what we need to do in order to avoid that kind of a bad consequence being impacted on society as a result of the failure of the African National Congress is to genuinely respond to what the conferences have been saying, that we've got to reposition the ANC, we have to renew the ANC, because in my understanding, and I think this is a view that is shared by many of us in the African National Congress, the ANC has got what is called twin responsibilities, one of which is the National Liberation Movement, which must then engage in the campaign to remain rooted among the sectors of our society. The ANC historically has always succeeded to ensure that it has the pulse of society on its fingers, so that it can influence the direction of all sectors of society, but equally mobilize them to contribute in the reconstruction and development of South Africa. But on the other side, we are now having this new, I can say the new reality that we're a governing party, which is the second task of the ANC. That therefore means we have to sharpen our capacity, firstly, to develop policies, practical implementable policies, and secondly, to ensure that we become a fact that generates new ideas in society, conduct research, we produce new knowledge that helps us to advance in the reconstruction and development of our country. But equally, we have a capacity not only to govern, but to identify appropriate cadres with the requisite skills and capacity to be at the center of social transformation in the state, nationally and in all 9 provinces that and the municipalities where the ANC is governing. Unless we respond to that situation, I'm quite certain that it is almost inevitable that the ANC is going to die. And that is why I've been advocating for the reorganization of the headquarters of the ANC, what I'm calling the restructuring of the organizational architecture.
So the truly house needs to look different.
It has to look
different.
different.
What would that look like?
Firstly, my own view is that we need 2 DSGs. The Deputy Secretaries General, we need 2 of them. We need one who's going to be dedicated to the building a campaigning African National Congress, ensuring that we revive our relationship with what we call the different motive forces of the NTR, the working class, the churches, the religious bodies, and everybody else. We must reconnect with those sectors of society, not only for the ANC, but for them to play a meaningful role in the reconstruction and development of our country. On the other side, you need a DSG that must reposition the policy capability of the African National Congress. You see today, I'm sure if you were to ask many of our leaders, all of them, including those who are in the top 6, which municipality is effectively functional and has cadreship appropriate to the task, you might not get a common answer. It is the center that must have that kind of knowledge, because that must not be a coincidence. It must be by design that the headquarters has a responsibility to develop this cadreship, not only for the ANC, but for the development of our country. And as you know, the ANC has had a very enormous contribution to the progressive forces in the continent. It has been very, very strategic and central to the direction of our continent, something that we have lost over the few years, because when there's a decline of quality in the ANC, there will be a decline of quality in government, and there will be a decline of quality to some extent to the level at which the ANC can impact on the direction of the continent. So my own view is that we must reorganize the ANC. For this, I hold the view that there's no need to have a full-time treasurer general in the ANC. There's no need for that.
But the ANC has had so many money woes over the course of the last few years. What difference would that make?
Look, I think my own view is that the TG doesn't have to be in the head office of the ANC. It can be a head of the ANC somewhere, wherever. It can be someone who's in business. It can be someone who's in the public side. Anyway, wherever that there would be a possibility for him or her, to build a partnership with the business sector, which sustain the African National Congress through its own donations and contributions. But if you have the two DSGs in the office, you see, Qaanitah, the ANC historically has been the thinking tank. It has had the capacity to cast its eyes ahead of society.
But and that has changed in the last decade. Why?
Sure, it has diminished because that investment on cadreship has rather been in theory than in practice. We said in 2012, we've entered into a period of a decade of a cadre. 10 years later, I'm quite certain that all of us will agree that resolution was good, but the implementation was not there. And the reason why the implementation was not there, in my view, is because you did not have the organizational architecture that is geared towards the realization of those resolutions. Because if you have a weak head office of the ANC, it's bound to implicate or to have a negative impact in the organization as a whole and as well as on governance.
And talk to me about the relationship between the Ntuli House and governance. How do you envision, in terms of that pencil line between party and state?
You see, the first thing that needs to be reasserted is that the ANC is a strategic center of power, which means it must conceptualize, it must develop policies, and leave those policies to cadres who are deployed in government to elaborate details. It's not the job of the ANC to say, you must implement it in this way. The ANC must have a trust. We want to build, we want to achieve social cohesion. What is it that government needs to do in order to respond to that? We want the economy that serves the majority of our people. Black people are still excluded in the economy. We've had BEE. It has worked, but it has not been successful. We now have to do something to ensure that the economy does not become, a platform of the selected. Then government must say what kind of policies that we need to elaborate and how do we ensure that. But the thrust of the direction of what needs to be done must be forged from the center. And the center has to be the headquarters of the ANC. But if the headquarters of the ANC does not have a capacity, it will not even see, it will not have not be able to determine what needs to be done, let alone how it should be done. You see, the last point I want to mention on this matter, we go to conferences, which is one of the things that I've been lamenting about for many years. When you go to a conference of the ANC, not everybody who attend the conference is an expert on anything or on everything. Yes. You have us who are activists, who come from different parts of the country, confronted by a variety of problems, poverty, inequality, and unemployment, who are concerned about NH, who may not have expertise what problems must be addressed with regard to NH. But if you have a headquarters that is fully functional, right, once policies are determined by the National Conference of the ANC, it's incumbent upon the SG and the SGO to then say, who are the progressive think tanks in this country who can then help us to translate this conference resolution to a practical, implementable program of action, including resources that are required in order to achieve this objective. If you just come from conference and you say comrades in government must go and implement, you would agree that you must nationalize the Reserve Bank, you must have a state bank.
But there's never an emphasis on how.
But nobody then sits back and say, okay, we are from conference, let's take the next 3 months, look at our resolutions, what can be done by when, and what needs to be done in order to achieve that objective. We don't have that capacity. We take resolutions, we go home, we then blame those who are in government. Those who now we have to remain with the responsibility to say, if you want to create a state bank, what are the steps that you need to take and how should you go about it? The ANC must have the capacity to say, of course, these resolutions must be implemented over a period of 5 years. But in the next 18 months, this is what we must achieve. In the next 24 months, what we must achieve. If by the end of this period, this has not been done, we'll have to accept when we go to the NGC that this is not practical, it will not be able to be done now. It must be part of our long-term strategy to do as we move forward.
We've been traveling to provincial conferences and some regional conferences. The quality of discussion, if at all, about ANC policies this year is very, very weak. And I know there's a concession in the ANC that the focus was so much more about electing leadership than resolutions and policies. I don't see that changing in the national conference come December, that there's this entire preoccupation on who gets elected and who doesn't get elected more than what are the tangible policy proposals.
Well, you see, when we were in the policy conference in July, it may very well be that in terms of what has been happening in provinces, we can't be proud of the quality of the engagements, the level at which our cadres and comrades have really, understood and conceived of the challenges facing the people of South Africa. But when we went to the National Policy Conference, I personally was very happy about the level of engagement at that level of the policy conference. I think if you look at the outcome of those resolutions, you can see that there was a very concerted effort to ensure that the ANC changes course in terms of the policy orientation. But it's work that needs to be done deliberately. What we are talking about, the weaknesses in various provinces and many of our branches, you can't sit, pray, and hope that it will happen. Leadership, I always say to people, a human being is born, but the revolutionary is constructed. You go through certain phases to produce the quality that you need for the challenges of your time. We haven't done that in the ANC. We have to do it. It's not something that is impossible. It's the orientation that needs to be changed. The head office must say, if we must produce cadres who understand the economy, what kind of a program do we take them through? How many in each province? And how are we going to monitor their development? Wherever they may be. There may be people who are working in the private sector, in the media, wherever. But how do we trace their participation? Because this is part of this important agenda of the transformation of our country. Now, people like President Mbeki and his generation and others who came below them were trained. They were prepared for the battles ahead. Many of us haven't. There are a few of us today who are exposed in some training of one form or another in order to understand, even to understand how to govern. What is governance? To build this kind of ethical and moral leadership, which has a sense of being ashamed when wrong things are happening and identify with themselves. But you've got to work on that. So the national conference should not be seen as a panacea. But in my view, if it elects an appropriate leadership, it must be seen as a platform where the foundation will be laid for the African National Congress to reposition itself. Because I think all of us in the ANC, there's a shared recognition of the fact that unless we do something between now and the end of this conference of the ANC is going to be weaker than it is today.
What is an appropriate leadership? Is that a leadership led by President Cyril Ramaphosa for a second term?
Inappropriate leadership is a leadership that, you see this way in which now we're preparing for the conference. One of the exciting things that are happening is that we're most likely to produce a leadership that is not beholden to any sector of society, that is not beholden to any sector of society, not beholden to any faction within the organization. We need a leadership that is firm, that is knowledgeable, that is principled. The leadership that is principled is a leadership that has the capacity to say, this which is happening in this area cannot be allowed to proceed in the ANC or under the ANC-led government, and act on the basis of that. Not a leadership that, when you occupy a position, and this is what I was saying even when I was a provincial secretary of the ANC in KZN, when you are elected, perform your responsibilities to the extent that it is possible. don't be overcautious about whether this may result in you not being re-elected. That's a problem we need to defeat in the ANC. It's
that has been the biggest criticism of President Cyril Ramaphosa.
Yes, it's people who, when you occupy a position, nobody today is president of the ANC. It's him. Nobody today is deputy president of the ANC. It's Mabuza. If you don't perform that task effectively, irrespective of the consequences later on in the next conference, who's going to perform it? So the leadership that we need is a leadership that is principled, that is loyal, but that understands the direction of our movement and where we need to take our country to. That's the kind of leadership that is not going to be found wanting whenever we need to act with a sense of firmness on matters of principle.
Who is going to be the next ANC president?
A very difficult question. I think all of us will see when the branches are electing at the conference later in December.
Who do you think should be the ANC president?
Well, I don't have a specific candidate, but my sense is that looking at the nomination that is going on in the country now, it seems to me that President Cyril Ramaphosa has an edge. If the pronouncements made by provinces are anything to go by, my sense is that he seems to be having an edge, and he's probably going to be the one that's going to be returned as president of the ANC.
But do you think that he should be president in a top six at the Ntuli House, that you would be the Secretary General?
You know, if he gets re-elected as president for the second term of the ANC, and I also succeed to be elected as Secretary General of the ANC, I think we will have the capacity to complement each other very well, because I grew up in the party. When I left university after having acquired my second degree, I was taken by the African National Congress to work in the head office of the ANC. I stayed there for a decade. When I left the head office to go back to my home province in KZN, I had a brief time in the legislature, 18 months or so. Again, I was made the provincial secretary of the ANC. So I have a deep sense of what the ANC needs and what the ANC has to do in order to respond to the challenges. So I think if I become the SG, President will have time to focus on the state and the direction of government without having to look on his shoulder what is happening in the party, because he will know that at the party office we have an organizer who understands how to organize not only the ANC as an organization, but the other forces that are important for purposes of the ANC to succeed in its own agenda.
There are other candidates that are contesting. One candidate who's gotten the nod from ANC in KwaZulu-Natal is Dr. Zweli Mkhize. Would you support a bid for his presidency?
Well, I think it's not necessarily for me to support Qaanitah. I think the question would be whether he's elected or not elected by branches. I think it will really not matter who am I supporting in terms of their propensity to be elected. I think it's a decision that will be made by branches of the African National Congress. But yes, as a PEC member of the ANC, there's a decision of the PEC. I'm part of that decision.
Do you endorse that decision?
I respect the PEC decision. I belong to that.
Did you support that decision in the PEC?
You know how the decision was arrived at. The PEC received a report from the working committee on the filling of the branches in the province following the consultation. And the feeling was that this is what the majority view said, which of course, as you know, it also excluded my name for the position of the SG. So as a member of the PEC...
Were you disappointed?
No, I wasn't disappointed. I mean, that was just a consultation. And the consultation is a consultation, and it stays as such. What matters most is what delegates decide when they arrive at Nasrec in December.
Let's talk about your time as in the KwaZulu-Natal. You were pushed and lobbied very, very hard before the provincial conference that sat in July, was it? To contest the ANC provincial chairperson position. And it was said by people behind the scenes that it was yours for the taking, to contest Ihlezi Kalala. You refused to do that, and you contested on his ticket for the secretary position for a second term under what became known as the Ankole faction of the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal. Do you regret that?
No, I don't. You know why I don't regret?
You're now an ordinary PEC member.
Yeah, and I don't regret the fact that I didn't stand as chairperson of the province. But I must also hasten to say Had I stood as chairperson of the province, I was going to win that contest. I think I would be the provincial chair today.
So why don't you regret it?
Probably a premier as well or an MEC. The reason why I did not support that approach, because I was saying the reasons that are being advanced for Sihle to be removed are incorrect. You can't appropriate failures and mistakes of the ANC and the ANC-led government to an individual. If Sihle did not do well as chair of the ANC, where was I as provincial secretary? Where was Mabuya Khulu as deputy chair? Where was Nomusa as treasurer? Where was Sipho Hlomuga as deputy secretary, which is the apex leadership of the ANC? No, I was saying, no, you can't do that. You can't say all of these problems that we've gone through. I mean, we went through a very unprecedented moment in KZN that no other leadership has ever been to, including those senior cadres of our movement. The Nzweli were once the top leadership of the province. So I said to comrades, no, I don't agree with this part of the position. Unfortunately, I think the advantage on my side, Qaanitah, is that I don't have ambitions to be in government. I don't have that ambition. My own really personal desire and personal interest is that I wish to be counted in future as among those few cadres of our movement who dedicated their time entirely to the rebuilding of the African National Congress. Because my own view is that if you rebuild the ANC, it then allows the future of our kids and our grandkids to be protected in this country. Because if the ANC is weakened and it dies, because you and I decided to rush for our own parochial interest to go and occupy positions in government, remove each other, not based on principle but based on expedience, that's a society that I think we need to frown at. That kind of a society. We need a principled leadership that is willing to stand even where your own interest may be at risk. That is the kind of that's what we learn from the giants and cadres of our movement who came before us. And I think they should be amongst us who still emulate them in the true sense of the word.
After the ANC KwaZulu-Natal conference, where Sibonisa Duma was elected chairperson, Betty Mtola was elected ANC provincial secretary, that was your position, we had seen a massive purge, firstly in the election of additional members to the provincial executive committee of the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal. You were among probably the only one that was on the other side that made it to the provincial executive committee. And then there was this mass removal of ANC leaders from their government positions because of the outcome of conference. What did you make of that moment in the province?
Well, you see, there's quite a few of us who were retained in the PEC. Comrade Kwazimshengu, you know, he was on the lineup with myself as a deputy chair. Comrade Kaunda, Olis Kaunda, and there are a few others. Comrade Jomo was the.
But obviously, the premier,
of course, our provincial chair was not re-elected. Of course, which was it was very sad for me, because people may not know this. Sihle grew up in the ANC. He is senior to all of us in that PEC. That he couldn't be re-elected back in the PEC. We lost an experience and the capability of a comrade that, in my own view, still has a huge to contribute to the African National Congress. And of course, as you're saying, it then followed with changes that had to occur in government. I think those changes that happened in government were, of course, the leadership had to. You have a newly elected provincial treasurer, for instance, of the ANC, who was not deployed anywhere. Some of us had expected that there would be a way in which that comrade is deployed to a certain responsibility.
But what's the moral, or the lesson rather? What is the lesson in terms of what happened in KwaZulu-Natal to national? What happens, I mean, when this plays out on a national scale? Does it affect stability of government? Does it affect the party in any way?
Look, I think my view is that it needs to be revisited.
That every time there's a new ANC chairperson, there's a recall.
That manner of proceedings is unsustainable, in my own view. It cannot be that once you are no longer elected as chairperson, you immediately lose the capacity to be part of government. It can't be. The ANC has to revisit that. This has been a trend for the past 10, 15 years. It's one of those things that, in my own view, going forward, the incoming National Executive Committee has to apply its mind on. Not that changes cannot be done, but changes must not be done only to remove those who disagree or were a different view from the elected leadership. Because when it's done in that way,
and it has been in Limpopo, in Mpumalanga,
exactly,
in KwaZulu-Natal.
It has a potential to also undermine potential and capacity. It has that potential, and I think the NEC will have to relook at that issue. Changes should be done whenever there's a need to do so, but it must not be a given that once you go to a conference, you are not re-elected, you are removed. Because if we proceed in that manner, I think in the near future that will be a big problem for the ANC.
You are up against Phumulo Masualle, who was the former chairperson of the ANC in the Eastern Cape, for this position of ANC Secretary General. He was supported by your province, KwaZulu-Natal, Limpopo, and other ANC structures have formally or not nominated, pronounced on his name. There's also Fikile Mbalula, who is running for the ANC Secretary position. We know that he ran for that position 10 years ago, and he's making a bid for this position. Why do you think you personally would do a better job in comparison to Deputy Minister Phumulo Masualle and Minister Fikile Mbalula?
Well, I think maybe the first, you know what's happening in my mindset is that I'm not against anyone, not up against anyone. It happened that there is comrades and structures of the ANC who have approached me to say, yes, you are not re-elected in KZN, but we believe that the work that we had begun in KZN was good and it can be used at a national level. So I have not seen that as being against or up against anybody else. They are also being raised on the basis that they can make a contribution. The reason why I think I would be able to make a contribution. The first thing is that society is becoming younger in our country. Also, I'm not arguing that I'm a young person, but at least I can still stay, for instance, if I'm elected as SG, in the headquarters of the ANC for a decade. And when I leave the head office of the ANC, I will still be far more than 60 years old. I will be about 51, 52 years old. And I think the ANC needs that kind of stability. We need the mentality that says whoever is elected as Secretary General of the ANC must be a person, both in terms of his or her own age and commitment, will stay in the organization at least for the next decade if re-elected 5 years later, so that we can consolidate the African National Congress. But the other thing that I think I would be bringing into that, Qaanitah, I'm a very fearless comrade. Those who know me will tell you, I've had instances in the past where I also differed with President Zuma and President Ramaphosa, sometimes publicly, when I believe the position they hold is not consistent with what the movement is supposed to be saying on a particular question. So that advantage of being fearless, of being brave, courageous, I'm very principled. It will be very difficult if you go through the history of my work as provincial secretary, where you will discover that I made a decision based on expedience. I don't do that. It may very well be that at some point certain decision will be made by me together with my collective that in the eyes of other people may not be principled decision. But where I have an opportunity to influence the direction and to take the decision as the secretary of the ANC, I think the records or history records will not find a situation where I acted with expedience. I don't do that. Maybe it's because, like I'm saying, I don't occupy a position in order to get into another position. I occupy a position, execute my responsibilities in that position, and let the future determine whether I deserve to come back or to get something else.
The faction or caucus that is supporting a second term for President Cyril Ramaphosa, they obviously came up with a lineup of leadership that also excluded you and supported Fikile Mbalula, and they opted for Senzo Mchunu as the kind of KZN candidate for deputy president in their lineup of who's going to be the top, who they want to be in the top 6 of the ANC. So on one hand, the Zweli Mkhize lineup excludes you, and the Cyril Ramaphosa lineup excludes you. How then do you think you'll be able to convince branches that you should be elected?
You know, the very interesting pattern that is now taking place in the movement. You will have myself, you will have David Masondo, you will have Mamluko Kubai, I think Pulemabe, Andile Lungisa, it's quite a few of comrades who are not appearing in any slates. I think the central message that structures of the ANC are conveying very, very, very strongly is that the slates have been the source of destruction of our movement. And the slates are new in the ANC. They started in 2007 when we went to the 52nd conference of the ANC. Before that, nobody can point to a scenario where, no, it has not happened. It's new. And that we are not in the slates is an advantage. Because it means nobody had said somewhere else who will remind us later if we get elected.
We got you.
We got you. But also the problem with the slate is that I can be elected with you on the basis that people are forced into electing me with you because they want you, and I'm not capable for the task at hand. Then I become an appendage to you, and because of that, I get elected into a position of responsibility. But I think we are on the path, on a very firm path and the foundation to defeat the slate. In this conference, if you look at what happened in Nasrec actually planted the seeds for the rejection of the slates. If you see how the leadership was elected.
So people from this side and people from that side.
So,
both.
but it happened at conference. Now, that foundation, you can see the fruits now, is happening before conference. That the structures of the ANC are saying, no, we are not going to that conference to elect a slate. And we are not going to have certain people meeting somewhere or whoever they are, wanting to decide for all of us in the movement. We know our comrades. We want to identify them on the basis of their potential and their capabilities to occupy certain responsibilities in the ANC. I'm very excited about that, and it really doesn't bother me that I don't appear in the slate of anybody. But for that matter, I also know, at least for President Cyril Ramaphosa, I know that he has not personally embraced any slate. I know that, as a matter of fact. At least for him, I can say he has not endorsed any slate. I do understand at times, comrades at times are saying, no, but why does he keep quiet? I mean, majority of everybody who build their own lineups, they say they support Ramaphosa. If you are supported like that, you have no responsibility to go and say, yes, you support me, but also support this or remove that one. You don't have to do that. But, you know, the exciting thing being in the ANC, and I'm happy it's happening during our time, and we still have more time in the ANC. We are relatively young. We are defeating the slate. And the defeat of the slate gives us an opportunity properly to rebuild the African National Congress.